The following is rated not safe for work. It contains strong language, adult situations, and lots of spoilers. Discretion is advised.
In the criminal justice system, cinematic-based offenses are considered especially heinous. The dedicated attorneys who investigate these villainous films are members of an elite squad known as the Reels of Justice. These are their stories.
Order, please, order. The Reels of Justice is now in session. Judge Dylan J. Schlender presiding. May all eyes the Honorable Judge Schlender.
Be seated. Welcome to Reels of Justice. Today we are hearing the case of The People versus Alien 3, the Assembly Cut, the extended and revised release of the 1992 sci-fi horror film about franchise hero Ellen Ripley, who crash lands on a planetary penal colony which soon becomes terrorized by a xenomorph menace. For those of you unfamiliar with our court proceedings, we are here to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. As always in this courtroom, films are to be considered excellent until proven awful, and the burden of proof lies upon the prosecution to prove beyond a shadow of a reasonable doubt that this film is guilty. Mr. Maynard Bangs, you are appearing on behalf of the prosecution. You may present your opening statement.
Your Honor, members of the court, 1979's Alien was a science fiction horror masterpiece that set new standards for both genres and is still considered today to be one of the greatest films of all time. Its sequel, 1986's Aliens, was an excellent example of how to blend sci-fi and action together and evolve the franchise in a new direction while still building upon the lore of its predecessor. 1992's Alien 3 was also a movie, often stylized as Alien Cubed for some stupid reason. Alien 3 is a huge step backwards for the franchise, creatively, aesthetically, in whatever ways you wish to measure it. It has none of the suspense of the first film, and even less of the excitement of the second. It boasts a bafflingly kludged together script, features a forgettable ensemble of faceless extras, and culminates in one of the most yawn-inducing climaxes in film history. Even the extended revision it received in 2003, known as the Assembly Cut, can do nothing to save it. In fact, in some ways, it even makes it worse because it just makes it longer. And dull and long are an excruciating combination, which I will exemplify for all of you here today. I think.
Thank you, Mr. Bangs. On behalf of the defense is Mr. Case Aiken. Please present your opening statement.
My fellow consumers of Wayland-Yutani products, we all know why we're here today. When it comes to the Alien franchise, Alien 3 is known as the bad one. It's the one people recall with vitriol, and it's not hard to see why. The theatrical cut was mired with production issues and chopped down to a point of incoherence. David Fincher, the director, has gone to speak of the production through gritted teeth and in the blue. However, since the film was released, we have seen a better rounded edition released in the Assembly Cut, offering a film that functions well as the end of the series. A series that would not end. Since this film was released, the franchise has lived on as a bloated, pus-filled taxidermy of its former self. Alien 3 was received poorly as an ending to a series that fans did not want an end for, but now in hindsight, we see that the chance to conclude the journey of Ellen Ripley should have been celebrated. I asked the jury to look at this film with fresh eyes and not the prejudice of an early, grunge-filled era.
All right, thank you, Mr. Aiken. Mr. Bangs, you may proceed with your first exhibit.
My first exhibit, Your Honor, is the way this film has to try to kill off several pivotal characters, the survivors from the previous film, Aliens. These characters were developed and well-loved, but due to their inability to once again secure the actors, the characters have to be killed off first thing in the movie, and it's done off-screen when their escape vehicle crash lands. And that's a real fuck of a bummer way to start your movie. Hey, everyone remember those characters you liked in the last movie? Yeah, because they're dead. They died in a crash in their sleep. But don't worry, here's some new characters for you to meet. They're all awful, and you'll just hate them. It's just a bad foot for the movie to start out on.
Mr. Aiken, would you like to comment on that? Was it the right move to kill off, I believe it was Hicks and Newt?
And Bishop.
Whether or not it was the right move for the audience at the time, it absolutely was the move that they were intending to make. The tone that they were trying to set was a pessimistic world, priming the audience for the nihilistic ending that we are come to see at the end.
If I could reply to that, Your Honor,
go for it.
I wouldn't say it's something they wanted to do. It's just that this film got stuck in development hell for over 5 years. The development for it began in '87, a year after Aliens. I'm sure they would have been happy to bring Newt back if the sequel had gotten off the ground then. It's just a case that they wasted so much time that she's a teenager by the time they get to filming this one.
Counterpoint?
Please, go ahead.
I think this was a blessing in disguise. If they had proceeded with a sequel immediately after, it would have been just like all these franchises pumping out sequels just because it happens to be popular. And it would be a sequel to Aliens and not Alien.
Wouldn't Alien 3 be a sequel to Aliens, though?
Yes, but the franchise as a whole has been dominated by this one landmark film that was the most commercially successful, whereas this attempts to be a conclusion to the franchise as a whole.
Okay, Mr. Maynard, if you'd like to proceed, Mr. Bangs, rather, if you'd like to proceed with your next one. You say as Rob Maynard right here on the screen. I have witnesses.
Now, the movie doesn't just kill off developed characters from the other movies either. It kills off its own developed characters too, which is a shame because it barely has any. Charles Dance's character Clemens is the man who basically saves Ripley's life, discovering her crashed EEV and then caring for her in the infirmary. A forbidden romance starts to brew. They make some very polite love, and we begin to find out about Clemens' past and his reasons for being on this planet. And then Clemens is killed. A little over an hour into the movie, Clemens gets killed off pretty much out of nowhere. One of the first victims of the xenomorph. Why introduce a character, put time into developing him, develop this relationship with Ripley, have the audience spend all this time? We probably spend more time with him than any other character we meet in the entire film. And then we just kill him off ceremoniously, unceremoniously. There's no suspense to it. It's basically a jump scare. And he's ripped apart. He's ripped right out of the movie. And after that, it's like he was never there.
Mr. Aiken, I must confess this is a point that rings very true for me, and I got to be unbiased as the judge. Do you have any explanation for the handling of this character?
I mean, far be it for a monster movie to have you care about the victims of the monster.
But do you think that maybe he got taken out too soon, though?
I think that the intent to set a character that we sympathize with, that we thought might be a new protagonist, that might see it to the end, a replacement for Hicks, and then to strip us away from that leads itself to the actual viewpoint of this film, this nihilistic journey into the fires of a hellish furnace.
So, Mr. Bangs, it's supposed to be one fuck of a bummer is what they're saying. What do you think to that?
If their intention was to make a movie that bummed you out, I just don't think that, especially following... I mean, even Alien has a kind of optimistic ending with Ripley being able to survive, with Jonesy, the greatest cat in film history. There's some levity to that. And I'll get to, I have a later point about how they kind of just do end up killing off everybody. But I think, back on the point of Clemens, I think this is a facet that's wrong with the assembly cut. Because a lot of the scenes that are put back into this extended version are these early exposition scenes where we learn a lot more about Clemens, and that makes his sudden death even more jarring than it was in the theatrical. There's a strong chance that those deleted scenes ended up on the cutting room floor for a reason.
All right, your objection, Mr. Aiken.
Objection. Most of the actual character details about Clemens are in the theatrical cut as well.
All right. I mean, we'll let the jury decide on Clemens. I think they've got a lot to chew on here, whether or not they killed him off too soon or his death was integral to the movie's overall message and tone. Your next point, Mr. Banks.
So we've killed off the beloved characters from the last film. We've killed off the beloved characters from this film. So what are we left with? Ellen Ripley and the most forgettable ensemble in film history. I challenge anyone, the defending counsel, any member of the jury, the judge, to name 3 remaining prisoner characters besides Charles S. Dutton's character Dylan, and something about them. There's like a dozen or so of these prisoners. They're all essentially identical. They dress the exact same. They're all bald. Half of them are either Australian or space British. They're impossible to discern from one another. You don't know their names, their backstories. They are literally just there to provide a body count.
Would you like to respond to the ensemble, Mr. Aiken?
I will concede that the ensemble is not well identified. I will note that the assembly cut does a much better job of adding characterization to the ensemble, but unfortunately it is a bunch of bald white men.
All right, well, you're not getting a lot of pushback on that one, Mr. Bangs. Take the W and move on.
I will, absolutely, especially when you compare it to, like, you know, Alien, where maybe you didn't know every person on the crew's job, but you could tell them apart. Or Aliens, where the Marines have such vibrant personalities. You know, they might be archetypes, but they're discernible, right? You know, you've got Vasquez, you've got Bill Paxton doing Hudson. Game over, man. You know, that stuff's great. And here you've got bald Cockney Rapist 1, bald Cockney Rapist 2, bald Australian sex offender. So my point is, it's impossible to tell these ensemble characters apart. And that makes it impossible to care for them. And that brings me to the climax of the film, though I don't actually think that word is appropriate here. But so the thrilling conclusion of the film is the xenomorph starts chasing these nameless, faceless meat shields around totally nondescript hallways. It's difficult to orient yourself because you have no idea who the alien is chasing, because you can't tell any of them apart. They're just hallways with doors they conceal. It's a terribly designed action sequence. It doesn't create the claustrophobia of Alien. It's just disorienting. And there's absolutely no suspense because, again, you don't know who these guys are and you don't care. They're criminals, one, so you don't care much. They're religious, which makes you care even less. And the only two characters left to care about, Ripley and Dylan, are stuck standing around waiting for the xenomorph to be lured into the trap, essentially removed from the situation.
All right, so Mr. Aiken, are there problems with the climax, or did this plan work out?
I think the prosecution has failed to understand what the actual stakes of the climax are.
Please elucidate.
The stakes of the climax are not the survival of the prisoners, although certainly we would like for them to survive. The stakes is the survival of humanity at large. There is a ticking clock once we enter the third act of the company arriving to take hold of both the xenomorph and the growing queen inside Ellen Ripley. The concern is to make sure that both of them die before that can occur. That is the actual climax. The death of the alien at the end is not the point so much as the prevention of the company, the true villain of this entire series, to prevent them from gaining this biological weapon.
I think that's a fair point for the jury to chew on. Mr. Bangs?
Oh, well, then why a 10-minute chase sequence with the alien chasing all these nondescript prisoners? Because to add to this, to make sure there was absolutely no possibility of suspense or excitement, the film establishes just before the climax that Ripley is hosting the Queen, as it was mentioned, which, by the way, means there are two face huggers on the EEV, one for Ripley and one for the Ox. And how many goddamn face huggers were on that ship? But so we find out Ripley's a host, and that means the other xenomorph absolutely refuses to kill her, which means she's never in any danger from it. And two, she's going to die no matter what. So the stakes of seeing her get away kind of don't matter. You talk about taking the piss out of the ending. Now you're talking about it's about humanity surviving. Well, then why this long chase sequence? You had flammable stuff. We've seen that in the earlier scenes. Give Ripley a couple of buckets of this, have her run up and explode right on the xenomorph. Movie over. Everyone's dead.
Over, man.
Mr. Aiken, would you like to respond to why Ripley did not set herself on fire and throw herself at the alien, as Mr. Banks suggests?
While the xenomorph is established as having no ill intent towards the Queen, it also hasn't really been established as having a lack of self-preservation. There's no reason to think that it would allow for a creature to just rush at it as such. I mean, we established very quickly that this creature is extremely mobile. The extended sequence, as we discussed, the point of that is to establish just how agile it is moving through the hallways, viewing it from this fisheye lens as it swirls around, moving as a creature who does not care about gravity with speeds preternaturally fast. The point is to establish that this creature is effectively invulnerable to their most mundane attacks, and Ripley cannot actually kill this thing on its own or on her own. And if she doesn't kill the xenomorph, then it's still game over, man.
Well, she corners it for quite a while. I mean, she grabs its tail at a while. So literally has the tiger by a tail in one section of the movie, and it seems pretty cornered and helpless for such an agile creature.
But they didn't have weapons either, did they, Mr.
Had
Banks?
she
There's
been
no
covered
guns.
in explosives, Your Honor, like I said, when she cornered it, which she proved she could do easily, she could have exploded. But instead, our boy Dylan makes the courageous sacrifice of himself, which is stupid because he didn't need to die to protect Ripley when Ripley's just going to kill herself 3 minutes later. But
objection, he didn't sacrifice himself to protect Ripley. He sacrificed himself to ensure that the xenomorph would die.
That's sustained.
That's fair. Okay. But it finally ends mercifully with Ripley ripping off Terminator 2 and jumping to some hot metal.
Objection, this came out at about the same time.
Actually, there's quotes from Charles Dance where they filmed an alternate ending because they were afraid it was too similar to Terminator 2, and then they went with that ending anyway.
We'll let the jury decide who's.
No, you're going to sustain that because I'm right. Charles Dance said it.
Yeah, you didn't object. Technically, he did. So I
can't object to his objection. That's some sort of.
I will overrule his objection.
Some sort of
the jury is
that I can't
to ignore any Terminator 2 discussion. There we go.
No, I hope we talk about it more. But anyway, so this death for Ripley, I think really sucks. She doesn't go down fighting, right? She should have died killing the xenomorph, like I said, exploding it or grabbing it and tackling it into the hot magma, just something. Instead of, she kind of puts up this defiant act in front of the Weyland-Yutani team that comes to finally extract the alien. But one, that's stupid. I don't know why they went to try to talk to her. As soon as they're in with guns, they should have tranked her and dragged her away, and that would have been the end of the movie. But instead, they try to reason with her, which is stupid. You should never reason with people. But I think it would have been a more badass way to go if she died killing the alien, the xenomorph, rather than just the unborn queen. In the theatrical, it's actually bursting out of her chest, which I kind of like a little bit more. But they take that out of the assembly cut. But with that, I will rest my case and pass it over to the defense.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Bangs. Mr. Aiken, you may present your first exhibit.
Let me just say that this movie isn't perfect. Far from it. But Fincher is a director with a great eye for detail. If you look at any of the shots that we are presented with, there is a visceral quality to any of the human pus, bile, any of the alien, the actual physical puppetry as opposed to the crude CGI of the era. Every single shot that invokes the sort of body horror of the series is extremely well shot in this movie. And for a director, a first-time director coming in at the 11th hour to produce this film, that is a triumph unto itself. The fact that the visual language of this is so watchable is a strong point. Consider the fact that the most iconic, or rather, I would argue the most iconic shot of the entire Aliens franchise, when the alien goes face to face with Ellen Ripley as she cowers, occurs in this movie, the movie that everyone calls the bad one.
Mr. Banks, can you take up any argument with how the movie shot, framed, that really is a cool scene with the little mouth coming out at her?
All right, Judge, there's no reason to editorialize here. You're supposed to be neutral.
I am neutral.
What I do want to say, Alien 3 is not necessarily the bad one. It's one of the bad ones. There's a few. You got Alien Resurrection still. You got Alien versus Predator. There's more movies people hate in this franchise than like. But I have absolutely no qualms with David Fincher at all. He did a really good job for a first-time director. He came very far from just being a Rick Springfield music video director. And you can see little flourishes of what he can do. He got a bad script, though. So I don't think anyone could have shot this movie much better than Fincher, but there's nothing you can do with a bad story. I mean, Kubrick couldn't have saved this thing.
Oh, okay. Mr. Aiken, you can proceed.
So I had conceded previously that the cast is monochromatic, we shall say, with the exception of Charles Dutton. There are a lot of bald white men in this. However,
Ben
it is
loves
still
it.
a fantastic cast when you actually look at it. Even some of the background actors like Pete Postlewaite, but I mean, as we mentioned before, Charles Dutton, Charles Dance, Brian Glover, these are all fantastic actors. Their performances are very strong. The fact that in the theatrical cut, most of their scenes were chopped down into oblivion, so we had no characterization, made it kind of a bummer to look at it. But looking at the assembly cut, it is surprising how much we glom onto these little interactive moments. Consider Paul McGann, who is Gallic, an actor who is constantly linked up with sci-fi properties that he thinks are just going to blow up in a wonderful way, only to be shoved away into sort of the the backside of things. He has an important point just as being the counterpoint of the religious iconography of this piece. The question about faith and how we deal with things in the end times requires us to observe that some people are just going to go mad. And he does an excellent job of presenting that, even if he was completely excised from the theatrical cut.
All right. Mr. Bangs, would you like to respond to that idea?
I have no real general problem with the performances. I think they probably could have benefited by cutting that ensemble down quite a bit so that we could have had more time with people like Postlewaite and seen more of, because he's a great actor and he maybe has all of 6 lines in this movie. He's the one you can tell apart the most, though, because he's recognizable. But you don't spend a lot of time with any of those dudes besides Dutton to really get attached or know anything about them. They deliver their lines fine, but again, I still think they're just faceless clones.
All right. I mean, the jury's going to have a lot to think about how the characters were utilized and portrayed. Mr. Aiken, if you'd like to proceed with another point.
I would like to talk about the quadrupedal nature of the alien.
Cool.
Now, as established in the first film, the alien infects a human host and then emerges and portrays some similar characteristics to the original host. The one spawned from Cain in the first movie has a human-like mouth, for example, or at least the teeth structure appears similar. It's bipedal. It has fingers that seem in that H.R. Giger kind of way to be sewn together in a terrifying fashion, but still reflect multiple digits, even if they're not functioning the way that they should. They're sewn together with the weird carapace of the creature. And then in the second movie, we got to see updates of this, but it was still based on the same form. This movie, either the theatrical cut where the facehugger affixes itself to a dog, or in the assembly cut where it affixes itself to a cow, is coming off of a quadruped. And we are provided with quite a fairly different alien in that regard that still is recognizable as the same type of thing from the previous films. For one thing, as I noted, it's a quadruped. It's a 4-legged creature mimicking the creature that it came from. Its movement is different. It seems dumber than the ones that appeared before. There are certainly some dog-like characteristics even in the assembly cut, because that's what they had settled on at that point, in the way that it reacts to the queen. And what I think is interesting about that is it provides an example of lore building at this end piece to the franchise that does not contradict anything that came before and works in tandem with the various merchandising opportunities that were presented in the previous things, the toy lines that were all built around these things, the comics, everything, allowing for the creation of an extended universe, allowing for these spin-off titles, these comic book series by Dark Horse, by the video games that were being developed, so many video games that were being developed, and to have an entry that basically confirms in canon the malleability of these creatures, while at the same time not overemphasizing the gimmick, I think is a respectful, tactful use of this larger element that had at that point been understood by fanon, but not necessarily confirmed inside the universe of the films.
All right, so, Mr. Banks, does the quadruped alien help the legacy? Does that really help give it a bump?
I mean, I think it's nice for establishing, or at least further confirming, that the alien sort of takes the shape of its host. Generally, I don't have any problem with it. I would have preferred, though, if we're going to try to make something interesting, why not have it host like an octopus? And then you could have some sort of like 8-armed xenomorph octopus just screaming.
Right. Order
in
the court. We'll let
Maybe
the jury decide.
One, have it get a
Well,
bird or something.
No. That's
make
too
a
scary.
A flying xenomorph. Like, these are ideas, people. But just like, we're gonna make it walk on 4 legs. They could have done more.
All right, we'll let Mr. Aiken continue.
Snake
then,
xenomorph.
Ultimately, it is no surprise that there is plenty to complain about this movie. It was a challenging production in total. The fact that Fincher came on so late, the raw number of scripts that came out, all of the points that the prosecution has made are very valid. And it's dealing with something that I'm sure all of the legal experts in this room, in this esteemed court, are well versed in. It is dealing with precedent. 2 fantastic movies preceded this, and a whole bunch of terrible ones. The Alien franchise, frankly, gets worse as it goes with every single one. It started off great. I love the first one the most. But the thing is, those first 2 set up a clear trajectory for how the story was to play out. And to articulate why that is, I must ask the court if I might go on a bit of a digression.
Oh, please. We love those around here.
I would like to talk about the Epic of Beowulf.
Here we go.
So the Epic of Beowulf, the 10th century or 9th century Old English poem, deals with a hero receiving a call from the darkness, from the frontiers, to come and deal with a great monster that is afflicting a kingdom. While there, we find that this monster, the Grendel, the son of Cain, is besetting this civilization. Beowulf and his party deals with this monster at great cost, and then incurs the wrath of the creature's mother. Being given the sword Hrunting by Unferth, Beowulf deals with the mother and establishes a legacy for himself, only for time to pass, and for in a dark point long in the future, because as is the nature of epic poetry, all time is inevitably getting worse. Things are getting worse. Beowulf is forced to deal in his old age with the dragon. Facing the dragon, he slays it, but is poisoned in the process and dies. And the most important thing I can convey right now is that probably by accident, the Alien trilogy is a perfect sci-fi representation of the Beowulf cycle. And I think it is a happy accident. I don't think this was... I think there are points that it was intended, but I do not think that it would have gotten that way if crass commercialization had rushed out a sequel that happened to feature Newton Hicks. Because we are treated in this series from start to finish with a perfect following of that arc, where Ellen Ripley, out in the wilderness, a fairly blue-collar individual, receives a distress call, just as Beowulf finds out that he has to go deal with Hrothgar. They travel out there. The one that is infected that births the monster is Cain. Ellen, at great cost, defeats the alien, only to then incur the wrath of the queen, the mother of these aliens. And then in this point, now all that she has fought for, all that she has suffered so much for, is dead. She is now poisoned by the thing that Gallic refers to as the dragon, and is forced to confront this creature. And in destroying it, and then having an offer of salvation, but that salvation would be ultimately even worse. The fact that she kills the monster in a less than action-packed way of like running it into the fire or something to that effect. The fact that she kills it and it then is offered a chance to survive, but chooses death because that is the heroic outcome, follows that path so well. You know, you look at Aliens when she is given her gun and it's explained to her, it's exactly like when she is given Hrunting, or when Beowulf is given Hrunting. You know, we are dealing with a movie where by the time we get here, they really didn't have another option for how to finish it. The dragon is the enemy here, and the dragon has poisoned Beowulf. And so we get this sci-fi conclusion to what had been set up, probably somewhat by choice and probably somewhat by happenstance, a perfect sci-fi recreation of Beowulf. And why is that important? Because these tropes are essential in terms of how we understand the primal desires of humanity. Sure, it might be, and I'm not trying to call this like a derivative work so much as saying that this is the strength of fiction in general. The Aeneid is studied not because it is a wonderful work of originality. It is studied because Virgil was very good at taking the tropes and the stories that have been told and crafting it in a way that was interesting with a solid meter. While this movie is not as solid a meter as what Virgil would put out there, it is a strong finish that at the very least like seals the deal. And we can see from all the sequels that it probably should have ended here.
All right. Would you like to rest on that point, Mr. Aiken? Or if you have anything else you'd like to bring up?
Just that to go along with the Beowulf point,
Sure.
Beowulf is a story about civilization butting up against the wilderness. And I think that is a very relatable fear and one that can be translated very well in sci-fi settings to our fear of the darkness of space. And that I think that it makes sense to start your franchise that way. I think it makes sense to continue your franchise that way. And here it is such a solid way to end it, showing that we all are going to fear the darkness, but we must persist.
All right. And so you want to call it there?
Yes, I would like to.
All right.
Rest.
You got it.
There's a small rebuttal, Your Honor. I'll say Beowulf 1 was fine, but Beowulf 3 sucked.
But what about the assembly cut? All right. Both sides have rested their cases. The attorneys will now present their closing arguments. Mr. Bangs, you may begin.
Alien 3, or Alien Cubed, was already really boring when it was released to theaters in May of 1992. And unfortunately, the assembly cut doesn't do anything to alleviate that problem. We didn't need the subplot of Gallic releasing Alien. We didn't need the additional exposition or development for Clemens or Andrews when both are killed off so quickly and without ceremony. I suppose making the initial host animal into an ox is fine if you want to fix the issue of the xenomorph scale, but that's really nitpicky. The assembly cut didn't do anything to address the biggest issues with the film, namely a forgettable cast of identical extras and a climactic sequence with very little or to no climax. With a film as dull as Alien 3 was, it didn't need an extra 30 minutes of footage to make it even longer. Bad movies are a lot like bad sex. The sooner you can get it over with and make it to the nearest shower, the better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Mr. Aiken, you may present your closing argument.
Alien 3 had a terrible production cycle. It was rewritten multiple times. Actors were switched out like crazy. Directors were switched out like crazy. The concessions of the increasing stardom of Sigourney Weaver was a big influence on what they were allowed to even do. Special effects were difficult to put together appropriately. And some of the crew just were getting old and had to be swapped out at various points. But despite all the rewrites, all the hurdles, all the hell of making this movie, honestly, could this franchise have ended? And this was intended to be an ending. Could it have ended any other way?
Thank you both. Members of the jury, Mr. Big Ben Haslar, Mr. Dylan J. Schlender, and Mr. Treat a Queen Like a Whore and a Whore Like Ryan Luis Rodriguez. You have all heard the facts concerning this case. It is now up to you to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. The bailiff will escort you to the deliberation room to render your verdict.
If you want to see a pile of goo that'll melt through the steel, you should try some of my dear old mom's sheep heat broth. Ugh.
What are we thinking, guys? Ben?
I'm not sure I saw the assembly cut. I think I may have seen the theatrical because I'm pretty sure I saw a dog. So I don't know that I'm the right one.
Oh, no.
Some of these. But, you know, I've only seen one of them, so I can't really, you know, compare the difference there. So I am curious what the rest of you guys think about it. As far as just my general thoughts when I was watching it before we get into like what the lawyers were thinking, it didn't bother me as much. It certainly is worse than the previous two entries, but it was entertaining enough because hey, it's aliens in a prison system. Like how bad can that be? That it didn't sink it for me. But I do think the things that bugged me the most are things that the prosecutor did bring up, like killing the survivors off first thing off screen. Hate that. Hate it when sequels do that. Like Thor does that. Like in every sequel it gets, it like cleans the stage and like, okay, this is our new story that we're talking about. Forget this cliffhanger that we had in the previous film. Yeah, the crew or the prisoners, not terribly memorable. I was wondering the whole time why Ripley was impregnated, like why, you know, this dog or ox or whatever it was got impregnated and birthed an alien first, and she's like sitting there, apparently got impregnated first, and yet, you know, is like sitting there through most of the film.
Well, you know, I would explain that away by it being a queen. It needs more time to gestate.
Right,
It's
I was
thin, but I can give it a bit of a pass for that. I mean, the movie does have to happen.
I was like, she's in a pod, and it's like, oh, but look, the glass is cracked on the pod, and it's like, oh, okay, but wouldn't that mean she's dead? Because she's like,
no, it's not an unfair point.
She would be really old though.
Right, or something.
And those things are supposedly like stasis pods. She would have to be like 40 years older, but of course they're not going to. Although to see an elderly Ripley fighting an alien, come on.
Yeah, no, that'd be
awesome.
That would be even more
That'd
Beowulf.
be so cool.
Which I did love that point on the defense. I did not see
like
that.
constantly hurting her hip when she's trying to fight it. Oh, that'd be awesome.
Coming out with a walker, get away from
What you guys should do? Let me
get away from her, you
myself
bitch!
and blow it up.
Oh man.
Oh.
Well, Ryan, what were you thinking, brother?
Well, I was surprised that I'd seen. I think this is maybe the fourth time I've seen this movie. I'd never seen the assembly cut before, but I can't. As I was watching the assembly cut, I was thinking like, I don't remember this from the theatrical in the first scene, and then I thought that in the second scene, in the third scene. So I guess I don't remember anything about this movie whatsoever. So I guess, yeah, I mean, I guess, but at the same time, like as I was watching it, I realized this movie hates me, it hates you, it hates the world, and that's kind of charming. I have to give it up to a movie that absolutely hates every single person that's going to pay a ticket to go see it. It's such a hateful thing to possibly do that I have to give it up for any movie that is that just openly hostile, especially for like, you have these two crowd-pleasing big summer blockbusters, and then you follow it up with this most pessimistic, just nihilistic, drooly mess that as I was watching, is just kind of like, all right, fuck you too. Cool. That's awesome. Moving on.
Yeah. So as far as the movie itself goes, you know, like it's okay. I think, you know, they both mentioned like the movies kind of get worse as they go. And I think,
they definitely,
and I think that's fair.
Progressively,
you know, and that kind of struck a chord with me, you know, thinking about like, you know, Nemesis was such a better way to end Star Trek than what Picard has turned it into. So that resonated.
Picard shit again. You're constantly talking about Picard.
I'm always going to talk about it, but it does resonate with me.
He gets paid every time he brings Picard up. I'm sure of it.
Oh God! Well, no, I'd be a shill. Call me CBS.
Paramount Plus. If you're listening, I will gladly talk about Picard all the time. If that's what you want to pay for, I've never seen it, but I'll talk about it.
But anyway, though, I was coming in. I was definitely leaning towards guilty just based on the facts, and I think Bangs' point about killing Charles Dance, that is such a heavy point for me, because he was getting interesting. I liked all that cool backstory stuff. He had a compelling story, killed completely unceremoniously, but not in a way that really elicited a lot of emotion besides just going like, oh. It's like, well, who are we supposed to follow?
You know,
now,
I disagree with you on that one. That one kind of reminded me of The Walking Dead, where like characters just like drop dead out of nowhere, you know, and that's what it'd be like in a scary, tense situation. You don't know if it's going to be your last moment or not, and then boom, I'm dead.
I guess, but like back to Maynard Bangs' point about like how even the Space Marines, sure, they were all archetypes, but they were distinct, and you could actually feel something, you know, when the what was he? Like he was the captain, and Vasquez both have the grenade and the air vent. You'd never get that kind of emotion out of any character in this, not even close. But now I will say, for the defense, that Beowulf speech, that really pulled me more than his. I like that a lot.
See, that's where he lost me, because he started talking smart, He started talking smart, and I don't like it when people talk smart on this podcast. We need to keep it stupid, folks. Otherwise, I don't understand what you're saying.
Oh man, I
I love that.
That was one of the better points I think we've ever had on the show.
In fact,
really
because of that,
with me.
and because of Fincher's directing, I'm going to go ahead and lock in Beowulf. That gets a not guilty for me.
That's right. Beowulf is not guilty.
Yes, so you're saying not guilty for Beowulf. But what do you think of this movie, Ben?
Also not guilty.
Also not guilty.
But not great.
Not great.
Dylan.
All right. Well, you're the foreman. And I hate making it hard for you, but I'm like at 60% guilty for this. It's just, I can't feel anything. I would love to read the defense's essay about like the oeuvre of Alien work and how Alien 3 fits into it. But if I have to watch it as a standalone movie, and just all the points that Maynard brought up, they just resonate. It's just too strong. I got to go guilty. I'm sorry.
Well, see, that's the thing. You're not making it hard for me, Dylan.
Oh.
In walking into this, I didn't want to give it guilty because I don't think that it's honestly guilty. I think that it's too interesting to be guilty. I think that every single point that Rob brought up, completely valid. The endless parade of bald white men is inexcusable. Sorry, Ben.
Like Ken you're
Sorry.
talking about.
You're one of the good ones, okay? If that makes you feel better.
Not all bald white men.
Oh God, no, don't hashtag that.
And like as I was watching this, I was really bummed that I didn't get to see Vincent Ward's previous version where it's a planet made of wood.
I read about that too, yeah.
That sounds so cool. But you know, in watching this movie, I was expecting to be mad because I guess I was in the past, but I've been shed of all that hostility. So in watching it now, it's kind of like right, not bad. Yeah. It's a movie.
Literally not bad is the standard for innocence.
It's the standard, so I'm gonna go not guilty.
Okay.
Let's go tell that very handsome judge.
All right.
You can put your cue card down, Dylan.
Mr. Foreman, have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor. In the case of the People versus Alien 3, the assembly cut, but not the theatrical cut, we find the defendant not guilty of being a bad movie.
Woo! Yeah! Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness gracious. Okay. So the verdict is so rendered. Alien 3, the assembly cut, will now be viewed in place of the original Alien 3 in the event of any Alien movie marathon. And join us next week for Alien versus Predator versus Alien versus Predator Requiem. Court is adjourned.
I know that's just a joke, but please don't threaten me like that.
No, might have to happen now.
Of course, it's not next week. That's just a turn of phrase. It's probably gonna be a couple months.
Jesus.
Greetings, Earthlings. This is Ben the Martian reporting to you live from outside the Reels of Justice. Maynard Bangs, you have won this case. You have lost. I'm sorry, you have lost. It is
my hopes
opposite
up
world
there.
on my planet. What are your thoughts on this verdict?
I felt kind of confident, and I'd actually kind of talked myself into really not liking this movie once I was watching it. But the defense, he pulled out the Beowulf maneuver, and I didn't see that coming at all. And it was what a slam dunk. It wasn't just a slam dunk. He rode a motorcycle up and slam dunked on the motorcycle. So I got to give it to him. That was well played. So
I could see it on your face too. I could see you thinking like, "Oh man."
Yeah.
That was great.
Thank you, sir. And here comes Case Aiken. You have lost this case, which of course means one on my planet. Can we get a word on how you feel about the verdict?
I think win or lose is ultimately the way you're going to feel regardless with this movie. It was a troubled movie, but I think that the shockingly coherent thematic elements that are carried over from the first two movies and are handled pretty well by a novice director who went on to be a great one. I think it definitely pushes it into the edge of good, and I'm glad that I was able to convey that with everyone.
Thank you very much. I am no mumbly mumblerson, as you can see, so I will now disappear to my planet, never to be heard from again. Nanu, nanu, goodbye.
Thank
You see
God.
that?
Ben the Martian did a really good job, which on his planet means he did a very bad job.
I deserve that.
But anyway, great job, Case. We are the Bridge Over Troubled movies.
Yes.
So, but I loved your Beowulf point. That was
that Beowulf point, man.
Yeah,
that might be my
go
favorite point ever on the show.
Go down in history.
Seriously, I love that.
We'll have
that was
the Beowulf maneuver, something like that.
Yeah, that was. It's like Reducto ad Shyamalan now. Like that's going into the queue.
Yeah,
we're gonna. That I love that. That was.
Yeah, I love when people can talk theme and stuff like that. So
yeah, no, that was brilliant.
I was glad to do that because look, this movie is a nightmare in terms of a production, and it's very brown, and like the week we're recording this, which is the week before this episode actually drops, I'm releasing an episode of my own podcast talking about how we could have fixed it. So there's certainly a lot to go into that whole kind of psychology there.
Okay, so there's an octopus tank on the refinery. The face hugger gets onto an octopus. We have an 8-armed xenomorph, and Ellen Ripley runs and drop kicks it, and they both go tumbling down into hot magma.
I'm pretty sure I saw a toy commercial.
I want the
Can't
gorilla.
do that because ink right in the face.
But it's acid.
Acid ink.
Right.
Acid ink.
You see, we're already writing a better movie, guys.
Oh, I know. Well, this is why Alien vs. Predator Requiem is a little more on the fun side. It leans into a few of those crazy things, you know.
Yeah, I will say, like, there is the goofy fun of that one. But if you're trying to do like just this franchise, like the problem is Alien 1 was not super commercially successful, but it is really interesting. And I think it's the best of the franchise. Aliens is the big commercial one that everyone fucking loves. So it's hard.
For good reason. It's great.
I like Aliens, but it's not as good as Alien. I mean,
the first Alien's easily the best.
Yeah,
not even a contest.
It may be,
but it's not Alien is not the
reason
reason why the franchise is popular. Is the thing.
Yeah,
that's
totally.
fair. Yeah.
And it's a weird element because it's so overwritten how we present Alien stuff. Like all the video games, all the media, like basically apes the format of Aliens specifically. And like Aliens kind of has shifted the way that you even think about the creatures in it. Like I always find it frustrating looking at Aliens where it just made them all bugs. You know, like the life cycle just became, it's insects, it has a queen, it has this whole like processy, whereas in the first movie that it's not apparent. So
it's an alien.
It's exactly, it's
literally
it's
alien.
intentionally incongruous, and like that element was lost in the second one, and it becomes a little like just flatter, and that's kind of a bummer for me looking at the franchise. And like this one's trying to sort of like get back to sort of like, it's weird, we don't fully understand some of the things, part of it, and you know, it's trying to balance it all out, but then everything afterwards is just like no, they're bugs, they're bugs.
Yeah, I can understand Cameron's mindset though, where it's like, well, they come from eggs, they have a larval stage, penis fingered vagina hand larval stage, and you know, so I think it makes sense. But of course we don't know what sort of creatures were on the planet before Aliens, right? Maybe there were some bug people on there the aliens got a hold of and they started replicating them. I don't know.
Yeah,
not a doctor.
Frankly, I don't know if I want to know.
Like, we're gonna
Aliens is great.
To explain it all to you.
But like, Aliens is great. Like I said, the mother thing is like a really strong element of that, and it's a big thing for Ripley in that movie. Like, so there's strong thematic reasons for it all. It's just like, you know, it's like it makes it easier to grok, and that like, that's a thing I love about the first one, where you can't.
Yeah, and then Alien Resurrection just hits you over the head, no subtlety at all with the mother themes.
He loves Alien Resurrection. That's a conversation for another day. I don't have time for it right now. Case, what else have you been working on? What have you got going on when you're not doing this?
So like I mentioned, I'm also a podcaster. I've got 2 shows that are in active production at the moment, which is Another Pass, which is a movie show where we look at movies from the vantage point of, if we were like a producer or an editor or someone with some pull on the movie, how could we have fixed it at the time of production? And so that means that we can't say, we would just do this really expensive thing on a low budget movie, because you couldn't just do that. Like, you would have to justify how you get the money, or if there's a big star that's the reason why a thing is working, you can't recast it. So we try to work within those constraints, and so we were working with Alien 3, and that was pretty hard because that was a production nightmare. So that show's been running for about 5 years now. And then I've got Men of Steel, which is a Superman and Superman adjacent fan podcast. So we basically the people on my podcast network, there's a lot of Batman fans. We just did a Batman event, and some of them use that as a ground to be like, I like Batman because he's not Superman. He doesn't always win. And I was like, can we not be dicks? And so my friend Jay, Mike, and I were like, yeah, let's just talk about like the fun of Superman and what's cool about those kind of stories and why they appeal to people. And so both for Superman proper, or then things like Invincible or like The Boys, stuff where you're dealing with the archetype and how it's then like the permeations from that. So those are the two main things. And then I also am part of a Star Trek fan film group. So we're doing an Indiegogo right now for a series called the new one's called Farragut Forward. The series is called Starship Farragut, and we've been running for about 15 years. And for the long time, we were doing like classic TOS era Trek, and we did some animated stuff that was in the style of the 70s cartoon. But now most of the cast is a bit older, and so it's appropriate that we're moving on to like Wrath of Khan style stuff. But that means like all new sets, and the Monster Maroons are crazy. So Kickstarter, or pardon me, Indiegogo.
So Indiegogo, tell us the name of the project.
It's called Farragut Forward. Farragut, like Admiral Farragut, or the Farragut, if you're familiar with Star Trek. Like in the 2009 film, for example, Uhura was like, you assigned me to the Farragut? Yeah.
And forward, like 10 forward.
Now, how much do I have to donate to be a Klingon in it?
So if you wanted to donate it and have us provide you with the wardrobe, that would be $5,000. Because we're going hardcore on the
wardrobe in the closet. So how much
if you already have it, chip in some money and then reach out to us and say, hey, here's my Klingon stuff, and we take a look and we'd be like, oh, that looks pretty good. Because frankly, like Klingon is a big reason why we can make this happen, because Klingon cosplayers are legit. Like there are some people out there who have like hardcore outfits, and it's a mix of either screen used or like perfect reconstructions that they have pieced together over the years, and they just are not professional but like semi-professional Klingon cosplayers. And so we've reached out to a lot of the people, especially in the DC area, which is where we're filming it. Ed brought them in for these shoots. So because there is that Klingon fandom, that's one of the reasons why this can actually happen.
That's
I
awesome,
want to ask
actually.
you a joke question, but how much to dress up like a Romulan?
Romulan's not in the script, so
a Romulan that wears headphones.
I mean, like frankly, we would be interested in extras if they had outfits already. Like I said, the only tier that allows for a walk-on part is the $5,000 tier, but there is a co-producer tier at $1,000, and there's starting at $20 and working its way up. So a lot of those are like digital rewards, and like we've got a few tiers where if you donate it, you'll get your name like assigned as a duty roster on screen at various points in the film that we've written in. So like we're doing a promotion at a con, and then there's like a tier that's a little bit later where it'll actually like flash being like, here's like ensign X for those spots. So if you just want your name in a Star Trek thing, like that's a way to do it.
That's really cool though. It sounds awesome, man.
We've had some great Star Trek people involved. We've had Kirk Thatcher, who was in Star Trek 4. Right, he's the punk on the bus, right, Dylan? I got it right.
Yes,
right?
he is.
It's 4.
No, that's exactly what he is. 4. Yep.
And we've had Rico E. Anderson, who was in Star Trek Renegades, which was another fan film, I believe, right?
Oh, cool. Yeah, I've heard of it. I haven't seen it, but
yeah, our listeners love Star Trek though, so you're talking to the right people.
I know. I've been listening to
they're
a
just
bunch
gonna
of
stick
backlog.
around. They have to because we talk about it.
Well, I've been loving it because like I've done so many episodes on Star Trek stuff, and like it's great listening to you all try to sort of defend some of these movies where I'm like, I did an episode of Another Pass where we tried to like dissect how we could fix these ones. So coming from the vantage point of like, is it even a good movie or not already is a fun one.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So Indiegogo, Farragut Forward. When does that end? When's the
end of
Indiegogo
March?
End?
So this is coming out at the very tail end.
Yeah, so you have about a week
but
left or so, just about to hop on to Indiegogo.
Yeah,
and
it's Indiegogo. So the nice part is that even if like we're not at the goal at the moment, but like even if we don't hit the goal, we will still be able to keep the money, and that we're going to make the production. Like we've got enough at this point, and it just means it'll be a little bit slower because it's a fan film and we have to finance things. So if we don't have the upfront, I'm the line producer and the executive producer and so forth, we'll end up having to put more money in, but it's a really exciting project. We have a prologue for that's up on our YouTube page if you want to check that out. It's also on like our Indiegogo page. It's a 3-minute, it's like the first 3 minutes of the film. It's really cool looking, just check that out. Like if you think that looks cool, imagine what we can do when we can do 30 minutes of it.
Yeah. Is the YouTube
Sweet.
page the same name?
Yeah, if you look for
Forward.
Starship Farragut on YouTube.
Starship Farragut on YouTube.
Yeah.
Cool.
Or Farragut Forward, it'll say Farragut Forward Prologue.
All right, cool.
Cool, yeah.
Now, we always ask for a recommendation from our guests for a movie you think people should see. So what is a movie people should check out?
Okay, so I've got one that is a self-pluggy one and one that's kind of just a funny one based on our conversation, if I may. So the first one is, if you're curious about our like Starship Farragut and like, is it worth it? Because like, yeah, the ones that we shot 15 years ago on standard definition with like a bunch of amateurs is a little bit rougher, but check out The Price of Anything. It's without a doubt the best entry in our franchise. Yeah, so that's a good Star Trek thing that we're doing. If you're actually curious about like, oh, can they make a good movie and not just a 3-minute thing? I'm like, yeah, we can. So check that one out. And if you like the Beowulf speech, check out The 13th Warrior. It's a really fun movie. It also had a bit of production hell. I think that if it was a better movie, it would be less interesting to look at. But I think it's still great and it's still a lot of fun and is just a really fun like deconstruction of the Beowulf myth from the vantage point of like pseudo realism. So like it's really cool in that regard. Once you start seeing that, like people like, people give it crap because like there's like a montage of like Antonio Banderas, who was playing an Arab learning Old English, and as a filmic representation of trying to learn languages, it's really cool. There's a lot of like language nerd jokes in it, which are really fun. It's a pretty good representation of the era, and we're actually talking about that on Another Pass in 2 weeks. And that's going to be, I actually brought in a college medievalist to discuss like sort of how accurate it is and like how it plays with the themes of Beowulf. So it's on my brain right now. That's why it was sort of like, yeah, I could talk about Alien 3 again. Like Beowulf, yeah.
Nice. Yeah, no, 13th Warrior is awesome. I love that movie.
That's a great one. So my recommendation this week is a low budget, high violence ripoff of the original Alien, and that's 1981's Inseminoid. This craptastic British sci-fi horror film concerns an alien creature that impregnates a member of a scientific research team, which in turn causes her to begin killing off the other members one by one.
Oh, no.
It's a bit closer to the video nasty side of the cinematic spectrum. The alien puppets are unconvincing. The acting is stiff. The gore is by the bucketful. And it makes for a great addition to any late night 80s horror marathon. And just your luck, Inseminoid is currently streaming on Tubi and Amazon Prime and Pluto TV. Hell, they just can't wait to give this movie away. So go bask in its gory.
Oh, boo.
Thank you.
Yay for the movie, but boo for that.
Dylan, you were the judge, so what's your recommendation?
Thank you, man. I really want to honor William Hurt because he's just passed pretty recently as of this recording. And so I want to recommend The Big Chill, but then I thought I should recommend a Sigourney Weaver movie. And then I remembered that Big Chill stars Kevin Kline and Sigourney Weaver were in a movie together in 1993 called Dave. Directed by Ivan Reitman, this movie represents the 90s political wish casting that would ultimately be typified by Aaron Sorkin's West Wing. The political optimism of this movie is redolent of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and I could safely say a movie like this would not work in today's jaded political climate. The plot is funny enough. Kline plays an actor that looks like the current president and has to ultimately stand in and pretend to be him. Weaver's turn as the First Lady is graceful and elegant, and her and Kline do have some real chemistry. Ultimately, the movie is about the idea of putting good people in the position where they can do the most good. And that's not such a bad message for the 90s or now.
You could have recommended The Village.
You know, I could have, couldn't I? Because that
Weaver.
William Hurt was
in it.
guilty. But I couldn't have because we have done it on the show before. And the Porky's 2 rule applies.
the Porky's 2 referendum.
Yes.
Absolutely. Big Ben, what have you got for us?
As we all know, David Fincher went on to direct the tremendous Zodiac, a film that served pretty much as a direct inspiration for my recommendation, which is the film that's on everyone's mind, and it's The Batman. The Dark Knight remains the only DC hero that they can knock out of the park when it comes to film, and it's the it's the best one in a while. It's a 3-hour film, and I was still walking out wanting more. Robert Pattinson is great as a year one Batman. Everyone else is great too. The Zodiac-esque Riddler, Zoe Kravitz, John Turturro, Andy Serkis, Colin Farrell, they're not slumming it. From start to finish, the film looks exactly like I want my Batman films to look. So to director Matt Reeves, I say keep them coming, sir.
Ryan, you really enjoyed it?
I did. I loved it. I got to see it on my birthday, which was one of the greatest presents I've ever given myself.
I saw it. I saw it on your birthday too. Case, you saw it,
Rob. That's terrific.
And it blew you away as much as Ben said.
I really liked it. So I sometimes get a little down on Batman fans because I think is a certain amount of toxicity, hence the Superman podcast.
I know one.
I very much enjoyed this. It felt like an update of like a lot of classic Batman stuff. It was really good at having things like big groups of like mooks, for example, for Batman to fight in a way that I felt very satisfying. Cool car chases. There were a lot of good moments of like, yeah, all right, cool. This is a 21st century Batman movie that worked really well for me.
And he's a detective.
Yes. I love the detective. I do.
Oh,
I
so
loved
good.
like 85% of it. I like Paul Dano. I didn't think he fit in this movie at all.
I disagree. It was
I thought he was totally out of place. He was really big. He would work in a Nolan movie. He wouldn't work in this one. He was too big and not grounded in the real world. I thought John Turturro did a much better idea. He was nothing like the Riddler either. I mean, he's more Joker than.
Well, there's a Zodiac killer-esque Riddler, which was great.
I guess. Anyway, and I also don't care for the climax, the actual final climax. So I would have ended the movies about 20 minutes before. I would have ended it there, and
we could have ended this podcast 20 minutes ago if you didn't go off on that tangent, Maynard.
I'm just going to cut everything you said earlier to save time. Ryan, what is your recommendation?
My recommendation this week is a gonzo 3.5-hour sci-fi epic originally produced for German television. It's Rainer Werner Fassbinder's 1973 film World on a Wire. This is a strange one. The Blu-ray box art describes it as a noir spiked tale with dashes of Stanley Kubrick, Kurt Vonnegut, and Philip K. Dick. But since I don't read, how the hell would I know? I would actually further describe it as what would happen if The Matrix was a murder mystery. So if that sounds even slightly intriguing to you, do watch it. I have to imagine that the Wachowskis are fans, and who could blame them? It's pretty awesome, and it was my first Fassbinder, so this is a hell of a way to start. World on a Wire is currently streaming on the Criterion channel.
Is it in German?
Yes, it is. With subtitles.
All right.
Sounds interesting.
So you do read?
I do when they're on screen, but not in a book.
If we could just put a whole book on screen for you, it would be
impossible.
Perfect.
Could never be done.
Nope. Not possible.
And with that, we are all out of show, but we want to thank our guest, Case Aiken, for joining us. Thank you so much, Case.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Go support Case's Indiegogo and go check out his shows as well. And we hope to have you back very soon, as long as you beat someone else who's not me.
I feel like that Beowulf rant was a one and done. So
what later he's going to compare the Batman to Beowulf, and we won't be able to do anything.
we might segue into Arthurian legend or the Odyssey, but
hey, don't even encourage him. Don't even encourage him.
We hope everyone will join us again as well as the Reels of Justice keep turning.
Count it.
Reading.
Please follow us on Twitter at Reels of Justice, Instagram Reels of Justice, and Facebook.com/Reels of Justice.